Welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today I'm going to teach you how to make my pattern 18 karat. I just love a pattern that looks super challenging but actually is really easy to make. And I love writing those patterns for all of you because then you can say, yeah, this took me a long time, to all your non-quilting friends. And if you're your quilting friends, they may have seen this video and know the truth, but super simple. I'm going to show you how to do it. To do the lap side version, you need one 10-inch layer cake. Or in this case, layer cake is a copyrighted term by Moda. Moda, don't sue me. You can get it from there, or you can get, I'm using the 10-inch charm pack in dark from K Facet Spring 2018. I really love all these bright fabrics. They are going to, well, they're still bright when they're Kaf, even though it's dark. Kaf is always bright. And then you need an equal amount of squares cut out in your background fabric. I got to see blanket statements, which was one of the museum exhibits that the Kate Facet Collective did. And hot pink is a perfectly accessible neutral, people, when you're working with Kate Facet. So that's what I'm doing. This is my neutral and I'm using this as my background. I'm sticking to it. So if you get 2 of these, then you'll have enough to do a queen size quilt. And then you also need double the yardage as well. But you can get the pattern at your local quilt shop or at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Then just get a 10-inch charm pack or layer cake and equal amount of yardage for your background, and you are good to go. So the most important part of this pattern is selecting what fabrics are going to go where. So let's get into this. Set this aside, we don't need it just yet. So what you want to do is separate it into sets of 6 that look good together, because when we put our little blings together, the blocks, but they look like blings to me, that's why they're called 18 karat. We want them to look good. So you want to start pulling sets of 6 that look good together. Now the Kaf people do a fabulous job of already color matching to make things look fabulous. So I'm probably going to stick with what they've got because they already have it in really good color order and have everything look good. Now, if you wanted to do a rainbow and have just a riot of color, you would want to make sure you have a riot of color in every single bling. So like every 6-pack needs to have like 6 different colors in it. Otherwise it's going to look weird. So I make the box 6 at a time. Ooh, I'm not really liking how that one looks together. I may not do things in order. We shall see. Let's see. I like those. And these 2 go well with it because they're more browny in texture. And these look good too with it. Okay, so I like these 6 together. Those are going to look good. But let's see what we can do with this one. I actually think that this pomegranate looks good with this because it has the reds from here and the blues from here. I think they look pretty good next to each other. So here's my next set of 6. So I'm just going to keep arranging in sets of 6 until I have 6 sets of 6. All right, so I've separated everything into sets of 6. You may have a few left over. I have chosen these 6 to work with for my first block that I'm going to show you guys how to do on camera. I need an equal amount of squares from my background fabric as well. So I'm going to set these to the side for a second. Now I'm using a black ink pen so it'll show up on camera, but you guys are going to want to use a marking pen that is safe for fabric. And you're going to mark from corner to corner on the wrong side of your neutral fabric. You want to be able to see the line very clearly from what you're doing. So I'm going to do that on all mine to make my first set of blocks. They're blings, you'll see. So I'm going to take one of the blocks from my 10-inch charm pack and I'm going to layer that right sides together with the block that I cut from my background fabric. Now, sometimes these are not cut perfectly at 10 inches. It's fine, don't worry about it. We're going to trim everything down later anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and put pins across the center where this line is, just to kind of keep everything in check because this is a really big block to do half square triangles from, which is what our next step is. Normally I wouldn't pin this, but since it's so large, it's probably a good idea to give it a try to just keep everything nice and together and straight as you're going through. So we can be efficient and chain piece this. Go ahead and do that for all of your other blocks within this bling. So you're going to have 6 sets of half square, well, what will be half square triangles pinned together. So I set my sewing machine up to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam. I always sew scant 1/4 inch seams whenever I'm sewing triangles from squares, which is my preferred way to do it. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring my square over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to line it up so that the edge of my presser foot is even with the line that I drew. And I'm basically gonna pretend that that line is the edge of my fabric. So normally you would keep the edge of your fabric in line with the edge of your presser foot in order to get a 1/4 inch seam. You're gonna keep that line even with the edge of your presser foot in order to get a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm gonna sew all the way down this line. And you absolutely can chain piece these. What you would do is you would just grab the next one in line, line it up, slide it under your presser foot, and let the feed dogs take it through. Make sure you remove this pins when you come to them. That way you don't break a needle. So if I were making this whole quilt and not for a video tutorial, I would keep chain piecing the rest of the first 6 that I pulled together. But for expedience's sake, for this one, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn everything around, and I'm going to sew down the other side of that drawn line, still lining the edge of that presser foot up with that line that I drew. What's gonna happen is we're gonna have about a 1/2 inch in between our stitching lines, hopefully a little less. And then we're gonna be able to cut it apart and have 2 half square triangles. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and sew my other 4 together, and then we're gonna come back and I'm gonna show you how to come apart, press them, and then create the strips that will become our blings for our block. One really easy way to tell if you've done this correctly is to measure. So if you line up your ruler with the edge of your stitching line, as long as it is less than a 1/2 inch from one stitching line to the other, or exactly on 1/2 inch, you're fine. You did a good scant 1/4 inch seam and your block is gonna be the correct size. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this apart, and I'm gonna line my ruler up so that it is going from point to point on the wrong side of that triangle across the line. Now we already have our accuracy in sewing our scant 1/4 inch seam, so it's not critical that you cut exactly down that line, but you don't want your seam to be too skinny either. So you do want to kind of stay down the middle. If you get too skinny, then your seam could pop open if you have it long armed or if you just with use over time. So just be careful about cutting anything too skinny. In this case, I've got a good 1/4 inch on either side. So I'm gonna do that for the rest of mine, then we're gonna press them open. All right, now it's time to press this, and I'm gonna press to one side in this case. And bias can be a little tricky because it can stretch on you. And you just kind of have to treat it with a little bit of respect and it'll be just fine. Don't just go crazy with the iron like you're trying to get every last wrinkle out. That's not what we're doing. We're gently pressing everything open. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set my seam. Then I'm going to press it open like that with my fingers first. And this kind of helps make sure the seam goes underneath that print side. And then with my iron fully on the neutral side, I'm gonna slowly drag it up. One of the biggest problems I see people make is they just plop their iron right on top of that seam, and then they can get a pleat, and then your block, it doesn't end up being square because you've got some extra fabric folded in there that isn't supposed to be there. But if you start with your iron completely on the side of the triangle you're pressing the seam away from, and then just slowly drag it up, then you're fine. And notice I'm picking up the iron. I'm not like going like crazy over it. I'm just picking it up, slowly moving it. And then I have a really nice straight seam. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that for all the others too, and then we're ready to cut them up and start making our block. All right guys, this is the only kind of tricky part in the entire pattern because we need half of our triangles to be orientated one way when we're cutting them into strips and half will be the other. So make sure you refer to your pattern. You can get it at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com or check your local quilt shop. They may have it as well. So I'm going to cut this into strips, and for this first one I want my neutral to be in the top left corner. You're gonna have one little strip left over. If you're a scrap saver, you can do fun things with this. If not, just set it to the side. All right, so this time when we flip it around and we have our neutral in the top right, what we're going to do is our extra strip is going to be from this side. So there's two ways you can do that. One, you can cut the width of the extra strip here, or you can flip it around and just do the strips going the other way. I'm going to cut, it says in your pattern how wide this is. So I'm gonna cut my extra strip off this side. We can just set that to the side. And then I'm going to cut my regular strips for the rest of the block from the remaining section. This is the way it shows you to do it in the pattern, so you can follow along with those diagrams to help make it clearer to see where the skinny strip is versus the other regular strips. So what's gonna happen is you're gonna put everything in reverse order. So I took the strips from the first square we cut and put them going in reverse order. And I'm gonna do the same thing with this side. And you can see how these are going to turn out. Now, this is still pretty boring because it's all one fabric. So I'm gonna finish cutting from my other pieces and then I'm gonna show you how to put these together. All right, so I've cut blocks from all 6 of the fabrics that are in here. And really there's 2 of each in this one, they're duplicates. So really it's 3 fabrics. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just going to flip one to the bottom for each one. So in this case, I've got all the same fabric on top. That would be boring. So I'm gonna flip one to the bottom to create my next one. And for this one, I'm gonna flip 2 to the bottom so I can get that 3rd fabric. This one I'm gonna leave the same. This one will flip 1 to the bottom again. We'll flip 2 to the bottom here. And then lastly, we will flip 1 more to the bottom. So that way we're gonna be able to have really nice color variation and different fabrics in each one, and I'll be able to start sewing these together, and each one will be different, which is what we want and what we're going for. So I set my sewing machine back to a regular 1/4 inch stitch so I can just sew these together. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and just sew 1 block together for you here. Just flip those 2 together. And you could pin this if you wanted to, since it's a nice straight strip. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna line up my tops and then line up my bottoms once I get a little bit ways down. Because they should all be the same length. I'm gonna line up the edge of those pinked edges there. Hold them in place, but you certainly can pin if you feel more comfortable doing that. Go ahead and grab the next 2 and put those together. All right, do the next 2 again. And the final 2. So I'm gonna hold off on pressing these until my entire block is together so I can press all the seams in one direction. So what I'm just gonna do is lay them out and open them up just with my fingers. Alrighty, that is looking the way it's supposed to. So now I'm gonna sew my sets of 2s together to create 2 halves here. This block is awesome because there are literally no triangle points to match. I lied, there's 1. And I'll show you that next. But the vast majority of them, the triangle point is against a nice solid piece of fabric, which is awesome. All right, so we do have to match these 2 points. It's the only ones we have to match the entire block. So what I do is I will lay them right sides together, and I kind of look at it from above because you're going to be able to see that those are going in line with each other. And I just line them up as best I can here. And then I'm going to put a pin in going diagonally to kind of keep that in line with how I'm going to sew. All right, so I've got the block together, but now we need to press it. And so I'm just going to do all of that at once, setting the seam and going as I work. So first I'm going to set that first seam. Press that one over. If this is too challenging for you, you can always press as you go as well when you make the twosies and then the foursies and then the whole block. So I'm going to unfold, set the seam, finger press it over, and just keep going in that manner until my entire block is pressed. So this is half of your block. This block is going to go together in rows. So you're going to have a bunch of these making one row, and then you will have the same block on the other side. I will kind of show you how that works next, but for right now, I have to go and make a whole bunch more of these. You go ahead and do that too. Then we'll come back together to get this quilt top together. Just one quick note too, as long as you're pressing the seams all in the same direction for every single block, your seams are going to nest perfectly when you go to sew your rows together. So in this case, I pressed all of my seams to the right. So every single block I make from here on out, they all need to be pressed to the right. And then when I have one coming on the other side of this, all those seams will be going in the opposite direction because we will have flipped it around, and now the seams are going to the left. Makes a really cool block, a really cool quilt. I'm going to go make a whole bunch more. You do too, and we'll be right back. So it's been about a week and a half since I last filmed for this tutorial, and I've gotten all of my rows together. And for those of you who think, oh, it's your day job to sew all day, it is not. My day job is to run a business, and I am sewing at night and on the weekends like the rest of you. Very little of my actual work duties involve sewing. So this is a totally doable quilt that if you want to get it done quickly. I was able to get this done working nights and weekends and working a very full schedule during the day. So I'm to the row part, and if you need to know how to sew your blocks into a row, I recommend you check out our video in our beginner quilting video tutorial series on how to assemble a quilt top. We go over that really in depth in there. The only reason I'm showing you this part is because this is our block here and here, but this quilt is a little different in that we don't actually assemble the block until we're putting our rows together. So you kind of want to lay everything out. I laid it out on a spare bed to make sure that everything laid out right as I was putting my rows together, and that this half the block is next to this one, and that I didn't have too many fabrics repeating from one side to the other. There's a few that are like on the same on this side and this side, like right here, but I'm not gonna let that bother me. You can drive yourself crazy doing that. So here's the really cool part. Because we pressed all of these seams going in one direction on our block, everything is going to nest perfectly when we put these together, making it really easy to join these rows. Let me show you how that works. So you can see the seams on my top row are going to the right, and on the bottom, they're going to the left. That means every single one of these seams is gonna butt really nicely. I've got one more tip to show you. I can see right here where this X comes together on the threads, that is where my point is below. So I put a needle through coming straight out at that top tip, and I'm gonna put it also through at my top tip of the corner below. Then I'm going to pinch that with the needle going straight up and down. And then I'm going to pin in the right side of that seam allowance and go ahead and remove this. And now as long as I sew to the seam side, so just to the right of that X when I'm sewing, then I'm gonna have perfect points when I sew it together. Now, one other tip, these are gonna really fit nicely together. It's not really something I can explain super easy because you have to feel it, but when you pinch this, you should feel like a threshold in a house. It should just be nice and smooth going over the transition. You should not feel a gap or a bump. That means that if there's a gap, it means your seams are too far apart. If there's a bump, it means they're going to be overlapping. And then I always pin in the right side. That one's running away from me. I always pin in the right side of the seam allowance. The reason is when I'm sewing, I'm going to sew along, stop with my needle down in the left side of the seam allowance, and then remove this pin. And by doing it that way, my needle acts as a pin and I'm able to keep everything and have really great joints. So those are my top tips for pinning. So go ahead and pin this all the way down, then we're going to sew it together and this quilt is done. So what I do is I sew along, and then I stop with my needle down when it is in the first half of that seam allowance, and then I remove my pin. You don't want to sew over your pins because you can break your needle. I've done it, it's scary. But this way, everything is going to be held in place and you will be able to have really great seam joints. All right, so we're pausing again. I know this is a lot of pins, but it's so worth it. I hate to pin, but I absolutely use like my entire box of pins to do this seam. So just keep on going and we're gonna be done very soon. So now you can just go ahead and press this open. Just press the seam to one side. It really doesn't matter what side, but you can see that our blocks are nice and together now. They're looking very cool, and that happens once you join your rows together. When you're joining these big two columns together, it's the exact same process, just you won't have any points to match because it's all your background fabric that's going to be matching, so it's less critical that it's absolutely perfect, but it's always nice to get those seams in the right spot. Thank you so much for following along with the 18 karat quilt tutorial. You can get this pattern at your local quilt shop or at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. At the time that I'm filming this, we have the layer cakes that I used with this, those 10-inch squares. This is a K facet dark colorway from spring 2018. We also have this background print. This is the Aboriginal dot, and I'll have links to where you can get all that stuff in the video description down below. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure you subscribe and hit the little bell notification so you'll know when we have lots of new ones coming. We're filming every week, and so we're having new video tutorials coming out for you weekly to get you inspired, learn more cool stuff about quilting, and have some fun. Thanks so much and happy quilting.